So in this video, I'm going to go over the entire Reddit AMA, where Larian Studios answered over 100 questions mostly regarding their upcoming game Divinity. Chapter markers will be down below to kind of divide the questions into different sections. Yeah, let me know your thoughts below. So I'm going to start off with a section dedicated to more of the gameplay type questions. Some of these might fit in other categories, but for the most part, this is gameplay focused. So the first question is, will there be co-op planned for release? And if so, can you say how many players? And Bert from Larian responds by saying, yes, co-op will be available for release. The amount of players playing together will depend on the final party size. But since modding is planned for this project as well, players will be essentially free to extend this. There's no hard limit to the amount of co-op players. So we don't know the party size yet for this Divinity game, but you could assume that it's probably going to be 4, I would say, more likely than not. And then of course Larian is saying that they are going to support modding for this game, and there will be ways to probably create official mods to where you can expand that party limit to way beyond 4 if you want to, like you can do in Baldur's Gate 3 right now. Will the looting system be random and level dependent like most items in Original Sin 1 and 2, or will there be more handcrafted items like in BG3? And Nick responds, the BG3 approach of handcrafting every magic item worked well, and it's something we've always wanted to do for Original Sin 2. Something we realized when working on randomized loot for Original Sin 1 and 2 is that fully random loot is frequently confusing. So we added more and more rules and pre-made patterns to make it feel more intentional. In the end, randomization did not save us much time. I'm a big fan of the mix system of having some RNG type loot in like boxes and stuff for more junky type items, and then the more important rare items are handcrafted and in set spots in the game. So I think Larian's heading the right direction for this. Up next, the WASD movement mod was one of the most downloaded and beloved mods for Baldur's Gate 3. Will the new Divinity game include native keyboard movement controls like WASD? Right out of the box, and the response from Artem at Larian is no. I actually am not sure why Larian is why they didn't explain this a little bit more. I'm not sure why they're, oh, did I mute? Nope, we're good. I'm not sure why they kind of seem like they're against WASD. There could be a million reasons for this that I just don't understand, but as of right now, don't expect WASD unless it's a mod for the game on 1.0. Controller support is of course a given though. Can you tell us about new mechanics in Divinity that you are most proud of? And Nick from Larian responds by saying, there was something that bothered me when I explored the starting areas of Original Sin 1 and 2 and Baldur's Gate 3. It stares you right in the face if you think about it. In Divinity, I can finally do the thing I wanted to do in every previous game. So a lot of people are theorizing or speculating that this might actually mean that swimming will be a thing, maybe fishing, maybe there's going to be some sort of water content. Not entirely sure. It's pretty exciting to think about swimming being a possibility though, because you start on a beach in Original Sin 1, 2, and 3, and you're staring at the water right away. So that makes people think that maybe Larian might be including some possible water type content in Divinity, which would be a big innovation on the CRPG genre. Will the game be playable in a more third-person view as opposed to Original Sin 2's isometric camera? And Bert from Larian says, the camera will work very similar as in BG3, so a hybrid of top-down and third-person camera. So I did make a video recently where I suggested the idea that maybe Larian consider allowing us to pull that Baldur's Gate 3 camera up a little bit to kind of see the sky or look up at buildings, etc. Right now, it doesn't seem like they're going to include that, but at the very least, we should have the ability to do what we can do in Baldur's Gate 3, where you can play more top-down like a traditional CRPG, or you can zoom in and play a little bit more like an action RPG. But as of right now, I wouldn't count on being able to look up at the sky. But you don't know. Possibly they still might do this. What are the playable races and classes? So Greg from Larian says, we aren't ready to talk about that quite yet, but if you rewatch the trailer, you should get some hints on the races. So in the Divinity trailer, we see humans, of course. There appears to be dwarves. There appears to be elves. We saw lizards, of course. I think all those are probably a given for playable races, but the most interesting race that at least I noticed in the trailer was orcs. I don't know if there's really half orcs in the lore. One of them looks kind of like a half orc. It might be a full orc, but I think this is the race that is probably going to be like a unique one that we haven't been able to play in Original Sin games yet. And I think it's going to be pretty awesome for this game. So I'm thinking orc is mostly confirmed. In Divinity, lizards are hot, elves are cannibals and weird, dwarves are seafaring people. Are you planning on giving the orcs a little special twist to differentiate them from the standard fantasy tropes? And Sven says, without saying which species are in the game, all of them have something unique. Will Divinity be sticking to the magic armor system found in Original Sin 1 and 2? And Nick from Larian responds by saying, Divinity will not keep the magic armor system from Original Sin 2. So yeah, that magic armor system where you had physical and magical armor was not in Original Sin 1. It was only in Original Sin 2. Nick also says there will be ways to protect your characters from harm, but you will not have to wait before you can use your fun skill on enemies. We are still cooking a system that makes sure that you have to work harder to stun lock solo bosses with level 1 skills, but it won't be tied to damage. So the armor system in Original Sin 2, where you can't deal damage to an opponent's hit points until you get through either their physical armor or their magical armor, and no CC effects can take place until a certain armor has been depleted. It's kind of divisive. Some people like it. Seems like a decent amount of people aren't a huge fan of it. Personally, I'm leaning on I would rather it not really be a system in the game. As long as Larian complements taking it away with making sure that opponents have like unique types of resistances and stuff like that, I would prefer, I like the direction that they're heading by kind of moving away from that a little bit. Really excited to see what they come up with. When you say Divinity will be your biggest game yet, what are we aiming for here? Baldur's Gate took quite some time to complete the story. Are we looking into double that, or thanks? And Larian's CEO and creative director Sven Vinke responds by saying, more agency, more consequences. We don't know ourselves yet how big it will be. We're still making it. And Sven also says, Divinity takes everything we learned from BG3 and Original Sin 2 and improves from there. In regards to BG3, I think the main thing will be more agency in a rule system that was made for video gaming, in addition to higher production values. Oh, and some really cool new friends to meet. All good stuff to hear here. More agency, more consequences. And even if you just do more agency and more consequences, even if your playthroughs are the same length, the game's bigger technically, because there's way more options and way more unique content that you need a separate playthrough to access. So I like that Larian's focusing on this. Then of course, higher production values. It's kind of crazy to think that we're going to go beyond what we were offered in Baldur's Gate 3, and then some really cool new friends to meet. I mean, of course, we're going to have new companions and stuff. I'm not sure if that's a hint at something else, but yeah. Will we have full character customization similar to Baldur's Gate 3? And Elena from Larian says, we are planning to have an even better one. More colors, more options, more control. So great to hear. I think we can expect the Divinity character creator to be improved from Baldur's Gate 3, according to Elena. The biggest thing, I think, with the BG3 character creator was a lack of face options. So there's only a handful to choose from for each race, and it made a lot of characters, even though they might have looked unique with their hair and their scarring and everything, it made a lot of characters still kind of look the same because a lot of people gravitated towards similar faces. So more face options. I'm sure we're going to get it for this next game. Would be awesome. Maybe they'll get into sliders. I'm not sure. Do you plan on having Divinity be playable on the Steam Deck? And Bert replies, we all love the Steam Deck. Since BG3 was one of the most played games on the platform, we will do our best to again release on the platform. Have you thought about accessibility as a part of planning this next game? As a gamer without sight, i.e. no sight whatsoever, who wanted to play BG3 but couldn't without constant sighted assistance, I'd love to be able to play Divinity on my own terms, and I'm very interested in if there's any chance of that happening. Looking forward to seeing what you craft. Regardless, keep up the good work. And Bert from Larian says, I am interested in this. In your experience, what are games that do well on that front? And then a bunch of people just replied below, giving Larian some ideas. So I think this is great that Larian's looking into it. Of course, you can't always, make a game that can fit every single person and every disability out there, but this person, I really appreciate the way that they asked the question, and hopefully Larian can find something to improve in this category, so more people with sight problems will be able to enjoy wonderful Larian games. Okay, on to the next one. Will there be mod support? And Larian replies, Artem replies, yes, we'll be providing modding tools, but we haven't decided yet if this will be for release or not. So for BG3, it took a really long time for that official mod support to come out. It'll probably be much quicker this time for Divinity, but maybe not on 1.0. But regardless, Larian seems to be positive about modding once again, which is great to see. On this topic, nobody asked a question about Game Master mode. Man, Larian probably wouldn't be able to answer it, but I wish somebody asked a question about that, because that would be awesome. You mentioned that the new game will have a new rule set in the PC Gamer interview. By that, are you guys creating a new combat system away from the action point based combat based on past Original Sin games, the mechanics rather than the spells itself? I assume this would allow you to be a bit more creative with full control on your hands rather than with the D&D rule set. Nick from Larian replies, we went through our original ideas for Original Sin 1 and 2, looked again at how they worked out in practice, picked up some inspirations from our BG3 EA and post-release journey, consulted the star charts to see what we need to do to stay competitive, and cooked a new action economy and character progression system. Feedback from BG3 players trying DOS 2 for the first time has been especially interesting to us, seeing the two worlds colliding. We hope that both fans of BG3 and fans of Original Sin 2 will find the new system intuitive but deep. So when people ask me what do I like better, what combat system, Baldur's Gate 3 or Divinity, I feel like I lean towards Divinity, but I can't answer with full confidence. I think they both have positives and negatives and strengths and weaknesses. So it's really exciting to me that Larian is really looking at Original Sin 2 and BG3 and trying to possibly find like the perfect combat system. But it's going to be different than what we experienced in Original Sin 1 and 2. They said character progression system is going to be different. Nobody, or I don't know, maybe somebody asked and Larian didn't answer, but nobody asked. I didn't see a question answered about, will this game have a classless system? Will it be like class based, or will it be the skill based that they had in the Original Sin games? I'm not sure. That's a big question that's up in the air right now, but the action economy and character progression will be different from the past, and that's exciting to think about. What are the odds of a Switch 2 port? Divinity Original Sin 2 is great on there and hoping for Baldur's Gate 3. Seems like the perfect game to pick up and play. I'd buy it in a heartbeat. Thanks, guys. You rock. And Bert replies, we have just released Original Sin 2 for Switch 2. We love the platform and we certainly will consider Switch 2 for the next Divinity game. BG3, being a D&D game, had most of the better story and world interactions behind succeeding on rolls and checks, incentivizing character growth and improving stats. This has the drawback of also incentivizing save scumming. Are there plans to try to make failing these dialogue / non-combat checks narratively more interesting, like Disco Elysium, to try to encourage players to accept bad RNG? I try not to save scum in theory, but admittedly usually only let a bad roll go when it feels like there aren't significant consequences. That means I'll be missing out on content I would have wanted. And Adam, Larian's head of writing, I forget what the official position is called, but the director of writing, the guy who does all writing, all things writing, has said, our ambition is certainly to make failure more interesting. There are already a couple of situations in the game where I think the most exciting and extensive outcome comes from failure, but you'll be the judge of how well we do. So cool to hear Adam, the writing director, say that he thinks there's a couple of situations in Divinity already where it's actually more exciting content to not succeed in a certain check. Now, we don't know like what type of RNG system Larian's going to use for these dialogue, persuasion, all these types of checks. Are they going to use like a dice roll system or what? Still up in the air, but regardless, Larian seems to be focusing on trying to make sure that if a player doesn't get their intended outcome, the alternative outcome, which makes sense, is going to be just as exciting, if not more. What are some of the mods you have seen for BG3 that have made you say, we should have thought of that, or we definitely have to include that next time around? And Elena says, love all the mods regarding player appearance. Lots of very creative ideas in terms of combining outfits, hairstyles, and whatnot. Our character team is always looking at those, and we take note of what our community wants. So good to hear. And Nick says, we're taking notes on all of the UI mods for sure. The UI team worked very hard to bring the complexity of an open world D&D adventure to video game format, but we had more improvements in mind that we just couldn't cram into our release. Happy we managed to make UI moddable in the first place. But once again, it seems like we're going to have more, you know, with character customization options and stuff like that. And it's great to hear Nick talk about UI specifically. It's a hard subject to nail in most video games, but especially for a CRPG where there just needs to be so much in the interfaces and on the UI and stuff like that. Yeah, it looks like Larian has got it under control. Hopefully we can still figure out how to improve inventory management. I don't know how. Man, it's still tough, and it's tough in every Larian game. What kind of innovation do turn-based RPGs need, in your opinion? Right now, when we look at the landscape, storytelling is rock solid, but what about the rest? And Nick replies, I'd like our games to be competitive with action games in terms of how good it feels to throw spells around, to explore the world, just to get immersed. There's a lot of innovation that goes into that usually flies under the radar. User interfaces, speed of AI calculations, camera interactions with the environment, and so on. It really brings me joy when I see a player leave a review like, I never played turn-based games, but I enjoyed this one, because it means we're keeping up with the industry at large. Turn-based games also have obvious strengths, and we try to amplify them. You can play at your own pace and just walk away from the machine if you need to. One of the reasons we introduced the on-demand turn-based mode in BG3 was that at any moment you can pass or press a button and the world freezes and you can breathe and look around without stress. So to me, that's kind of indicating that in this next game, we will have the ability to not only pause the game, but enter the world into turn-based mode outside of combat. You couldn't do this in Original Sin 1 and 2, and it's kind of funny if you play Baldur's Gate 3 and then go back to Original Sin 2 and try navigating a trap or something, you feel like such a noob. You feel like a first-time gamer because you're so used to pausing the world in Baldur's Gate 3 and navigating. I have a feeling they're going to go back to that. It's not 100% confirmed, but Nick did kind of touch on it right there. And of course, great to see a mention of camera interactions because they're a little wonky in BG3 sometimes, as well as Original Sin 2 and 1. And yeah, Nick is right. A lot of people have been converted to being more open-minded about the turn-based genre in video games after playing a Larian game such as Original Sin 2 or Baldur's Gate 3. There have been a lot of mixed opinions regarding the curse environmental effects. Personally, I thought they were fun to consider, but over time became a slog to play through. The oil field fight took ages to complete, for example. What's the internal opinion on this? And will we see their returns in your next game? And Nick comments, it's cool to have alternative versions of elemental surfaces that change how you have to play around with them. We maybe went too far the last time with giving every surface a cursed and blessed variant. Few people immediately guessed the function of blessed oil, for example. So he's talking about Original Sin 2, not Baldur's Gate 3. The duration of combat encounters is also on our mind. The oil field fight directly inspired the tech we showcased in BG3 that allows multiple simple enemies move and attack at the same time, cutting down waiting by the player. We also tried to avoid monsters crawling around very slowly. So I share the opinion that Original Sin 2 and the first game, especially Original Sin 2, there was just way too much surface crap going on. Half the time your entire screen is just red because the whole ground is on fire, or some type of blessed or cursed surface taking up the entire screen. And it's fun in certain situations, but over time it gets a little bit annoying. The funny thing is Larian actually did bring some of that into Baldur's Gate 3 in early access. When early access first launched, when you would shoot a cantrip at a player, let's say a firebolt or a ray of frost, it would automatically create a surface effect on the ground. So you could see some of Larian's style carried over to Baldur's Gate 3's early access with the surface effects, but then they decided to tone that back, which I think was a great decision out of them. It seems like they're still aware of that, which is good, because I prefer the Baldur's Gate 3 surface effects over the Original Sin 2 surface effects. What couldn't you do in BG3, Original Sin 2, that you'll be able to do in the upcoming Divinity? Nick says, we figured out ways to burn things that we could never burn before. We'll still give you something to put out the fires, though. No worries. My initial thought to reading this is maybe we're going to be able to burn down like actual buildings and stuff in this game, which is pretty cool. Very excited to see where Larian innovates on their previous games. Yeah, I don't know. What are we going to be burning down in Divinity? Maybe the whole world. Okay, moving on to the story, lore, companions, writing section here, stuff that deals with that. How would you describe the difference in tone between Original Sin 1 and 2, BG3, and Divinity? I'm personally very fond of the humor in both Original Sin and BG3, whereas the reveal trailer for Divinity set a pretty brutal tone. Not saying it has to be one or the other, but is the balance different this time around? And Adam, Larian's writing director, says, I laughed out loud reviewing a dialogue this morning. I mentioned in the answer to another question that a game this size needs lots of tonal diversity. Sometimes the darkest situations become funny because a player's response to them or a companion's commentary, and sometimes a joke backfires and everyone is suddenly on fire. So keep in mind that Baldur's Gate 3's reveal cinematic trailer was also very dark in tone and quite gruesome. Not as gruesome as Divinity, but it didn't represent, every moment in Baldur's Gate 3. And I think it's going to be similar in Divinity. I think Divinity is going to feel darker than Original Sin 1 and 2. because Larian now has the resources to visually represent some of the darker themes that are present in the original Sin games, they're just not visually presented in a way that would make them feel that dark. They're written pretty dark, but they don't feel that dark. Larian is going to keep some humor alive in this next Divinity game. I think that's pretty good. Personally, I think they're pretty good at humor, which is hard to do these days to reach a large audience because it's so subjective. But we're going to have some jokes in this next game as well, but I think it's going to feel darker than original Sin 1 and 2. But it's not going to be like just the pure trailer the entire time. Imagine an elf eating flesh, which is part of the lore in Divinity, normal lore, but now it's going to be visually represented. That alone is just going to make the game feel probably a little bit darker, even though technically it's not. What is your writing process like in terms of planning and accommodating players who like to do quests out of order or find hidden little details? The writing process is to embrace the chaos, to encourage the chaos, to be at one with the chaos. Now, I find Adam's response interesting here because the question was find hidden little details was in there. So I wonder if Adam repeating the word chaos 3 times right there indicates that this game's plot will center around the Lord of Chaos, the creator of the demon race. Adam also says the first thing we tend to do when playtesting our own situations is to run them out of sequence, break them in every conceivable way, and see how far we can push the boundaries of what's possible. The greatest joy I get is seeing somebody go so far off the beaten path that they assume we'll have lost track of them, and then they stumble across something that we put there just for them. How will you handle the canon issues Original Sin 2 introduced? It basically acted as a soft retcon of the series. Will the new Divinity game continue with the new lore, or will you try to reconcile it with the previous games? And Adam responds, it's in the same continuity, but it's a standalone story. Long-term Divinity fans will find lots of familiar things, but it's never just fan service. It has to serve the story we're telling. The Divinity universe is full of weird and wonderful characters, and I'm really excited to be a part of that legacy. So I'll get into more details on that question specifically in a future video. There's a lot of lore in Divinity that like when Original Sin 2 came out, kind of made the previous lore not seem like it was right, etc. But Larian does appear to want to be really focusing in on really setting a good foundation of lore for this next game. And you'll see some more questions coming up here dealing with that. So let's continue on. Will I be able to follow along and enjoy the upcoming Divinity game if the only Larian game I've played is Baldur's Gate 3? And Bert from Larian says Divinity is a different universe than Baldur's Gate 3. So Baldur's Gate 3 is based on Forgotten Realms. Larian does not own that IP or anything like that, but they own the whole Divinity franchise, the world of Rivellon. Very different, both fantasy but different. While you do not need to play the previous Divinity games, it would certainly improve your enjoyment. If you do, you'll perhaps recognize certain characters or situations to learn to explore the large universe that was already built for Divinity. And of course, right here on this channel, I'm playing through all the previous Larian games, taking notes, trying to become a lore expert, and I'll talk about all this and have you all prepared before the next Divinity game comes out with a full series, etc. Will Divinity be more cinematic like Baldur's Gate 3 or more in the lines of top-down text like Original Sin 2? And Greg says we have an incredibly talented team of cinematic artists and animators. I wouldn't be able to hold them back from doing what they do best. So I would expect, at the very least, on the level of Baldur's Gate 3 when it comes to all the dialogue, cinematics, and everything, but clearly it's going to be even better than that. But at the worst case scenario, it would be on Baldur's Gate 3's level. Just my own personal take, but the trailer put me off wanting to try the game because it's so nihilistic and viscerally depressing, but I wanted to ask if it's an accurate depiction of what I should be expecting in the game itself. And Sven himself says we're creating a dark world so you can be the light in the darkness. It's a story about hope. But of course, we do want you to experience agency, so there's also plenty of ways to take away that hope and be the darkness that snuffs out the light. So I like this approach. You make things dark, then the light shines that much brighter. And Sven was touching on being able to go the evil route in this game. So if they really do go deep into the dark, evil type content, it looks like you're really going to be able to embrace that on a level maybe we've never experienced before in an RPG. I love BG3 and was planning to play Original Sin 1 and 2, but then I saw on Wikipedia there are more Divinity games in the universe. Does the new game have story elements from these old games? And Adam says, I was a Larian fan before I was a Larian dev, and I played every Divinity game as a fan and sometimes as a critic. I love both of the original Sin games, and if you enjoy them and want to dig deeper into the catalog, I'd recommend Dragon Commander for something completely different. The new game isn't a sequel to any previous Divinity game, it's completely standalone, but it is set in the same universe and continuity, so if you've played earlier games, you'll find familiar things, but Just like you don't need to have lived through all of history to understand a specific time and place, you can come to Divinity without any prior knowledge at all. So Larian already did mention previously that if you do want to experience some of the games, Original Sin 1 and 2, if you have limited time and you want to play more modern games, Original Sin 1 and 2 are the two that you should play. They're the most updated when it comes to lore and the most modern when it comes to gameplay design, quality of life, and all that good stuff. Will Divinity have a similar approach to companions as previous titles? A big highlight for me was the different storylines for companions in BG3 and of course the romance scene. And Adam says, they're a hugely important part of the game and I already love some of them dearly. We have big ambitions for them and we're already complicating their lives and our own with the narrative design. So we kind of already knew there was going to be a big companion system, but further full confirmation now. Anything in particular you are excited for players to get to experience in this game? And Sven says there's a lot, but we prefer to show and not tell. That said, lizard romance seems like it's going to be popular. Then somebody else commented about fellow content creator Luality, who likes to crack jokes about that. I don't know if they're jokes, but likes to talk. We'll stop there. With each game you've improved in writing a story and narrative for your games, what are some other things you would like to improve narrative-wise compared to your previous entries? And Kevin, Larian's senior writer for Divinity, says companion relationships. Firstly, to have more interaction between companions, not just with more and better banter, but to have them develop deeper relationships with each other, just as they do with players. Secondly, to ramp up player friendship and romance more subtly, so relationship building feels more natural. Talking about what he said at the end of that statement, yeah, more subtly I think would be good for everyone. Still let people, you know, get deep into the sexy, crazy romance, but a more subtle build up for, I would say, the majority of the companions would be favored by a larger portion of players than the way that Baldur's Gate 3, when it initially released with all the companions just like 2 dialogue lines in and you're butt naked face down on the bed. Really hope they focus on that friendship aspect and give us some more platonic type scenes and stuff like that. That's a big hope of mine. And then Kevin also mentioned they're really focusing on having our companions develop relationships with each other. So hopefully that means like at our camp and all that, like companions will be interacting with each other more scenes related to that. Good stuff to hear. Next up, is Divinity going to be pulling any particular idea, gameplay concepts from the original titles, Divine Divinity, Beyond Divinity, etc.? Why drop the original Sin title now? Love all your games, got to meet the team and Sven at PAX East a few times. I was always blown away at how open and willing to chat he was. Can't wait for what's next. Sven says, there's never been a Divinity, and now that we can finally make the game we always wanted, we thought it was time to do so. We're taking the opportunity to vastly improve and expand the world building and set a new direction for the series. This is my big hopes with this game, is that the world building in Divinity will place Divinity's world building on the level of like Elder Scrolls and Witcher and stuff like that, because it would be amazing. So great to hear that out of Sven. Let me just preface this by saying that I'm a huge fan of you guys, blah, blah, blah. Will you be bowing less to fan pressure this time around? Quite a lot of people, myself included, feel like you tend to listen too much to negative story feedback to the detriment of the writing quality, such as Will getting a rewrite many felt was not needed and resulted in him being undercooked compared to the rest, making companions less mean, which weakened them, the lack of writing for Helsin after you recruit him, as well as lack of use for him with a druid companion in Jaheira, etc. I think these are good points, even if you don't necessarily fully agree. I think there's some good points in this question right here. I know it's hard to tell what people like and don't like, since people tend to be louder about the things they dislike than those they like, but your writers can really cook, and I think it's important to let them, rather than listen to random people on the internet who will always find something to complain about, even if there isn't really anything to complain about. And Adam, the director of writing, says, thanks. It's often in a writer's DNA to listen to negative feedback. We are sensitive souls, but I'd never let my team bow to pressure. I genuinely enjoy reading and hearing feedback from fans, and our community do influence us, but any decisions made are for the good of the team. That doesn't mean we always make the right decisions, and narrative and characterization are complex beasts, so it's rarely a single writer making any major change. We don't make any changes lightly, because the knock-on effect of even a small adjustment can be enormous. When Baldur's Gate 3 first launched into early access, people didn't complain a lot about Shadowheart because she was sassier and meaner than she is in version 1.0. Not sure if that was the right call or not the right call. Shadowheart's a very popular companion, so maybe that was the right call, but that is an example here. Gerald, what monster designs were you most pleased with in BG3? Secondly, moving away from Wizards of the Coast IP, are you excited for your team to have more freedom of creature design and artwork? Gerald says, all of them, not exactly a monster, but I love the way the Dragonborn came out in the game. I felt that it struck a great balance of elegance and monstrousness. Divinity indeed is a different challenge. We have all the amazing ideas from Original Sin and the previous Divinity games that we would love to look back to get and inspired by. I think I said that wrong. So it's going to be a nice blend of looking under the hood of our previous games and making the most of the creative freedom we're getting in Divinity. In terms of art direction, are you aiming for continuity with Original Sin, rethinking the visual identity to be more in line with BG3, or are you aiming for something new entirely? In terms of combat gameplay, can we expect similarities to previous Original Sin titles, or are you taking an entirely new approach? Gerald comments on the art question here. I don't think we got a response on the combat. With regards to art direction, Divinity is a new story and will have some continuity in the characters from our previous games. The announcement trailer we released is a good visual tease of what we have in mind, but you'll have to wait for the full reveal. So many characters in Divinity lore, in Original Sin 2, and even the other games as well, are very likely to show up in Divinity in some way, shape, or form. And yeah, like Malady could be there. That would be pretty cool. Thane, of course, Zandalore, all the wizards and all that. There's so many characters that could show up. Jahan, I'm excited to see what they do with that. What fantasy genre best describes the atmosphere and setting of Divinity? More the direction of BG3 and high fantasy, or will it be a more grimdark setting as the trailer kind of suggested, or something entirely different? Adam says, I don't think there's one specific genre or subgenre that could describe the entire game. I will say there's a lot of folk horror percolating in my brain. It's interesting because I guess the trailer did give a little bit of a folklore vibe, you know, like the effigies and stuff like that, like burning witches, even though that's not what they're doing in the trailer. But one of the criticisms of BG3 writing is that the party members don't have as much of a relationship between each other or talk to each other as much as other RPGs. Is that something you're considering when creating Divinity? And Adam says, yeah, the goal is to have more interactions between party members, and it won't always just be talking. So that's good to hear. I want more of, you guys remember when, you know, Lae'zel and Shadowheart, Lae'zel almost ends Shadowheart's life, and all that stuff is great. I think it makes the game feel a lot more real and the companions feel a lot more real. So I think we're getting more of that in Divinity. BG3 had a fantastic romance that lasted throughout most of the 3 acts. Are you doubling down on this? Is there even a greater focus on it? And Adam says, when we're designing and writing the romances, the goal is to make them memorable and to have them feel like a natural part of a character's personality and relationship with the player. That means we discover the way to tell the romances as we develop the companions and their stories alongside character artists, cinematic artists, animators, performance directors, actors, and other developers. Help will manage to push deeper into the depth and complexity of romance, love, and some other not always positive emotions. And I'm very excited to see what our cinematic team cooks up. In regards to his last statement about not always positive emotions, I'm really hoping that they do dig a little bit deeper into companions, you know, possibly developing negative feelings towards the player character if you really are working against their goals or not being the personality that they like. I think that would be pretty cool. Narrative question. One of the problems with branching path narratives or giving the player too much freedom is that it can get a bit messy quite fast and muddy the main narrative and story the game is trying to convey. Considering Divinity will be grander in scope compared to BG3, I'd imagine there would be more branching narratives and ways to tackle problems. In what ways do you try to achieve this, but at the same time mitigate the problem of narrative falling apart without railroading too much in certain key story beats? And Sven says, and don't forget multiplayer, that makes it even harder, but it's one of the things that we want to get better at with each game we make. We hate railroading and want you to have total freedom, but still experience a compelling narrative. We learned a lot from BG3 and are now applying those lessons together with a host of new ideas. Very exciting stuff. Ricky the Wizard says, when creating companion characters, where do you start? From an aesthetic vibe, an archetype, a story role that needs to be filled, and where do you find your inspiration? And Gerald says, from a concept art standpoint, I see companions as an opportunity to inject culture and history of the world we are building, either overtly in their costume design and appearance or subtly in their accessories details. This may not exactly be a starting point, but it's a great foundation for inspiration. Will interactions with NPC be mocapped like BG3? One of my favorite things was how every NPC felt unique to interact with. And Greg from Larian says, me too. In fact, we just built 4 new VO performance capture volumes with more in the works. So all that stuff is getting a boost for Divinity. Is the threat of Great Acorn still looming over Rivellon? Sven says, it is not all squirrels were smited. And this is, of course, a reference to Sir Laura in Original Sin 2. Funny little character, side little character arc. Is there any small spoilers you can give us that will sound completely nonsensical until we play the game? And Adam says, alligator. So make of that what you will. Have you brought on new narrative designers for Divinity? The lore feels quite disconnected. And Kevin says, as a matter of fact, we brought on a storytelling team devoted to developing deep and consistent lore / stories in the Divinity universe. This is probably my favorite response out of Larian for the entire AMA. I love to hear this. They're clearly going all out with the world building and cleaning up Divinity lore and really beefing it up, and I'm excited to see what they come up with. Hello, I'm a new fan since last year, and so far I've liked your games a whole lot. I especially like the romance of your games, such as in Original Sin 2 and BG3. So my question is, will you be trying to add more to the romance scene or keep it at about the level of BG3? Thank you for reading. Greg says, we definitely want to progress from what we've done before. There's been a lot of learning as to what worked and what people liked. We plan to apply all that for Divinity. Also, maybe polar bears this time. All right. Okay, now we're going to get into the ever so controversial topic of AI. So, the first question. First, I just want to say I love your games. I've played Original Sin 2 and BG3. They're both fantastic. I'm curious, what is your opinion on the role of generative AI in the game development process, and for your studio in particular? Some studios like Embark and Warhorse, as well as several East Asian ones like Everstone, seem relatively optimistic on it, and they've talked about using it to make bigger and faster games. On the other hand, I think a lot of studios and a lot of gamers think that it predominantly undermines the creative process and cuts corners. I'm especially curious about it if there's a split between different sections, like writing versus art versus coding, etc., since it seems like the views of an adoption of AI differ quite a bit by category. First, I just want to say, great question to priceless pennies. It's more nuanced. It's not just straight up attacking somebody because somebody mentioned the word we can't speak. It's a good question, and they want more specifics, which is exactly what the AI topic needs. It needs nuance. We can't just do blanket statements about AI and stuff like that. It just comes across as so dumb when people do that. So Sven responds, the creative director and owner of the studio. Hi, happy to hear you enjoyed our game. So first off, there is not going to be any Gen AI art in Divinity. So my thoughts right now are that that was the biggest thing that a sect of the internet was going after Larian for. The reason why I say a sect is because I personally, I don't like Gen AI. I'm not like a pro Gen AI type person. I'm not like fighting for its existence, and I want to advertise it and make it better, etc. But at the same time, like, especially with the way Larian said it at first, they're just using it for like moot boards and stuff like that. I already knew they weren't using it for the final product. To me, I just like, okay, I don't care. Like, that's not that bad. I'm not going to purity test them down to the bottom level for something like that. I honestly just don't really care. Now, if somebody's going to use Gen AI for the final product, sure, I start thinking a little bit more deeper on it. It's a little bit more complex in my brain, but I really don't care if it's used at a moot board or whatever like that. And if you do care, I think that's fair. But like, I don't know, man. It doesn't really bother me that much. So I'm happy that Larian, however, is announcing that they're not doing Gen AI specifically for art. At first, they said they were using it for the moot board, so the concept artists weren't using it to draw their art. It wasn't going to be the art in the game, but they're using it to convey ideas to each other. I think it's fine that they're dropping this. Some people are going to say that Larian caved to the audience of people that were screaming at them, and that may be true, but personally, I don't know. I actually think this is actually not a bad move, because I think them not using it for Gen AI art in particular isn't going to make a big deal here, and they're just better off just not using it for that at all. I think it's going to be better for them, even though people are going to still be on their ass about everything else, like the internet will internet. But I think this is actually a good move. So now we know Gen AI is not going to be used for art specifically. They're not going to be using it for moot boards. So as far as, the stealing art from other artists and all that, Larian is not doing it. They're not doing it at all, is what they said. But this topic is a little bit more complex. So Sven also says, I know there's been a lot of discussion about using AI tools as part of concept art exploration. We already said this doesn't mean the actual concept art is generated by AI, but we understand it created confusion. So to ensure there is no room for doubt, we've decided to refrain from using Gen AI tools during concept art development. So that's very specific. Yeah, we'll see what people say about that, but I actually think it's a good move out of Larian. That way, I already said that. Having said that, we continuously try to improve the speed with which we can try things out. The more iterations we can do, the better in general the gameplay is. We think Gen AI can help with this, and so we're trying things out across departments. Our hope is that it can aid us to refine ideas faster, leading to a more focused development cycle, less waste, and ultimately a higher quality game. The important bit to note is that we will not generate creative assets that end up in a game without being 100% sure about the origins of the training data and the consent of those who created the data. If we use Gen AI model to create in-game assets, then it'll be trained on the data we own. So like, to me, this is very, very reasonable. I think this is actually, I'm perfectly fine with this. Yeah, so on to the next one. Hey, pretty big fan of your games here and was disheartened to hear the discourse and statements about AI usage and development of this project. Is there a chance you can lay out exactly how this is being implemented alongside how it exactly makes development of the game smoother compared to games that didn't make use of it by your studio? Larian games normally feel lovingly handcrafted by a team of artists. Why was the previous method of development wrong enough to step into the Discord? So Gabriel from Larian says, this is all new technology, so I totally understand why it's difficult to see where the positive uses are. We believe machine learning is a powerful tool to accelerate and make game development more efficient and streamlined. This means that our creatives have more time doing the work that makes their jobs more rewarding and the game a richer experience. So, you know, we got machine learning. There's so many nuance, there's so much nuance here with like the type of Gen AI, the type of machine learning, etc. The important bit to note is that we do not generate creative assets that end up in a game without being 100% sure about the origins of the training data and the consent of those who created the data, which is what Sven said. With over 100,000 voice lines scheduled to be in the game, recorded by hundreds of actors, and even hundred thousands more to be recorded that will not end up in the game, there are useful tools for us to reduce the mechanical legwork and free up time for teams that would be bogged down doing tasks that kept them away from what they really want to be doing. Additionally, our ML R&D team monitors, so our machine learning research and development team monitors and experiments with anything that is state-of-the-art that might influence game development pipelines of the future. This is important to us because we make our own engine, but we draw lines in the sand too. We explicitly committed in our actor agreements to not using the recordings to train or build AI voice modelers because we are aware of how sensitive it can be to artificially generate an actor's voice. Even if an actor were willing to agree to this, if we'd compensate them, we don't currently feel comfortable with including AI generated voice in our game. So clearly still a bit of a touchy subject. I think studios are not sure about every element of it right now. But yeah, I don't see a problem with this. I know some of you guys are going to. Fair enough, but to me, right on, Larry, and keep making your game. All right, next up, do employees who don't want to use Gen AI have that option, or are they required to use it? And Gerald says the team has full autonomy on what tools and software they want to use. Now, I just want to just do a quick point here. I know that we're really, not everybody, people are really mad about a studio using Gen AI, even the bad type of Gen AI where you're taking assets from other places. You'll never know if somebody does this on their home computer or if they do it on a side monitor or something like that. So we got to be a little bit realistic here. I think it's good that some studios are deciding not to use this or say no to it, etc. But ultimately, you're never going to know. If you really want to solve this issue, it has to be, I don't know, talk to your lawmakers or something like that, because you're never going to stop somebody from doing it if they want to on their own. How does the art team feel about the usage of AI? Can they walk us through the process more specifically? And if it has been helping efficiency, will it remain a part of the development process? So Elena, the art director of Larian, says, I can't speak for everyone. We have a very diverse international team and each person has their own opinion on the matter, but in terms of production, we don't use AI to generate art assets. This is so true that people having their own opinions on the matter. There's such a wide variety of opinions on this, and studios go through the same exact thing. We see AI as a potential tool to optimize certain workflows. It's just, I mean, this is just anybody that can't understand that at all. I don't know what to say. Like, if this is just so, of course people are looking into doing this. And of course, every studio is looking into this in some way, shape, or form, regardless of what they tell you. For example, it can be used for motion capture, data cleanup, or retargeting animations from the actor's original performance capture, as already mentioned in the AMA. We don't want to use AI to make game assets, generate models, or even base models to sculpt on top of, because those assets would never meet the quality bar we're setting for the art in Divinity. So art in Divinity is going to be according to Elena, the art director, they're handcrafting pretty much everything. We've also decided to stop using any AI and concept art as reference material, so there's no ambiguity about the nature of our art assets. That said, having any generated concept art in the game was never our intention either, which is what I assumed even after the initial article, that came out by Jason Schreier. All right, I want to know if Gen AI would be used as inspiration for concept art or even used to make the concept art, because I and a lot of people think that concept art phase is the most creative phase of them all and would be marred with the touch of AI in such an early phase. Now, I think a lot of people do feel this way, but I think it's important to note that there's artists that have different opinions on this as well. And some people say that an artist using Gen AI in any shape or form or whatever, like it ruins the art process. I guarantee there's artists out there, very talented artists, that if they saw Gen AI or had something to do with it, it's not going to ruin their art. I think this is a very individual opinion here. And I don't like when people try to speak for everybody when they don't know for sure. This person did say so I respect that. But Elena responds, the creative process also doesn't stop at concept art stage. Our 3D team uses it as inspiration and guidance and brings their own artistic vision to the assets. We continue iterating on the meshes all the way to the final stages, because what matters most to us is seeing these assets working in the game. Then we got another response by Divinity's art director, Gerald. Concept art phase is a really creative phase, and the reason why I am in this industry, but our narrative and gameplay teams are equally creative, and ultimately we create concepts in unison with the narrative and design seeds they've sown. Our references and inspirations come from a combination of different sources, our experiences online, books, films, and games. All right. Still going on. There's a lot of questions with AI. I understand there's been a lot of discussion around the pushing hard for the generative AI stuff. So let me just pause real fast. The pushing hard thing is because Jason Schreier wrote an article, and the headline of it was basically Sven is pushing hard on generative AI. Some people have different takes on if they actually feel that Sven was pushing hard or not. There's transcripts out there that you can read. Seems like most people don't think that it was accurate to say that, but anyways, that's where that comes from. It was said that was being used for concept art and then for PowerPoint presentations, so it would be helpful to maybe elucidate what exactly that means and how you're using it inside your studio and how it really affects the new Divinity game. Gerald says, our team is incredibly creative and we use any visual means we can to communicate ideas across different departments and teams. They are not final products. They are mood boards, doodles, combinations of text and images. Gen AI based imagery was part of that, but by far not the only thing. It was just part of a mix of things we did to get a certain level of understanding of complex matters. Now, they said they're not doing this for concept art anymore, so don't forget that. Personally, once again, I'm just like, this is such a minor thing for them to do and to use. I can't, I'm not livid or angry, even if they kept doing it this way, even though I understand. And I think it's better that they don't do it. It's not going to make me mad and try to, go crazy on the internet because somebody used it in a moot board or a PowerPoint presentation. But that's just me. There was also Gen AI based tools that helped us render things faster, lighting, filling, textures, etc., which helped with presentation. But as said, we don't want there to be any doubts about the origins of the artwork, nor do we want to disrespect other people's authorship. So we've decided to refrain from using these tools during the concepting phase. So I am seeing some people saying that this isn't a good move out of Larian to do this. Other people very happy, other people not happy no matter what. Personally, like I said, I think it's good. If you guys want to know my opinion, I'm very happy with the direction that Larian's going after this AMA. We also have, can you describe how exactly you use Gen AI for game design? The concept art statement was rather vague, and I want to know how it improves productivity over, say, a Google image search. Now, I know they already kind of answered this, but I want to give you guys every Reddit AMA question answered here so you get the full context. So Nick at Larian says, when we talk about game design, the rules of game design, character progression, loot, combat encounters, level layouts, and so on, there is no Gen AI used. Designers are not going to chat GPT to ask, generate me 10 spells. Frankly, we always have more ideas than we can cram into the game. So of course, I believe Nick here, but once again, if anybody wants to use chat GPT at any company out there, they can do it on their phone, they can do it on their own time, they can do it on a second monitor. If we really want to stop stuff like this, you're going to have to find other ways, because you're never going to know when somebody uses something like that. All right, next. And a follow-up to my previous question for Gerald, as far as you can tell us, what are the greatest differences between working on concept art with AI integrated into the workflow, as opposed to a few years ago when it was not integrated? Thank you very much in advance. And Gerald says, Gen AI, like any new tool, starts off as a novelty, and it takes a bit of time to fully test and explore where it ultimately fits in all of our creative workflows. The AI tools, particularly Gen AI tools, change so fast that it's hard to tell where it's going or where it'll end up. When I started as a concept artist, I used to have to scan my pencil drawings to be cleaned on the computer. But now we have VR concepts, photo bashing, 3D concepts on top of just drawing with our tablets. I would say that now we're so spoiled for choice with all these different tools, AI or not. It's becoming very clear that having strong intent and desire to come up with novel, original, fun ideas is more important than ever. Okay, only 3 more for AI. I just wish that somebody, perhaps the head of machine learning director, would specifically explain step by step a way that it was used. So far, all you give is there are 1 million audio files, and with AI something reduce legwork. How does generative AI reduce legwork? Use an example. Change the IP names to Billy and Bob. Just something specific and not PR, please. So keep in mind, this person might have asked this question before, you know, they saw other Larian devs elaborate on the subject. And Gabriel, Divinity's machine learning director, Larian's machine learning director, says a good example would be retargeting and cleaning animations. When we record lines, we record audio, video, and motion capture at the same time. That data needs to be converted into actual animation data, joint data in a 3D space over time. For one of our species or rigs, if you want to be more specific. So for instance, if an actor is playing a character that is a dwarf, their animation needs to be adjusted to accommodate the physics of that race, shorter, wider, etc. That was traditionally done by hand by animators, one animation at a time. This is very repetitive and boring work. Machine learning, both generative and non-generative, is able to help in that process by creating a first version of those retargeted animations that, although not perfect, usually is much better starting point for animators to work from. Sometimes the motion capture data contains errors that need to be cleaned. Machine learning can help in that. Using ML to help out here frees more time for animators to work on more creative and interesting pieces of work. So they're saving time for some of the animators. Now, some people might say, well, that can end up, you know, taking away jobs or something like that. All we've seen from Larian so far is they have increased the size of their studio. So I really do think we need to be a little bit more careful with who we go at for certain things. Larian's increased their studio. They've hired more concept artists and all that. Other studios are literally just laying off people in droves and trying to replace them with AI, a lot of the big publishers, etc. Larian is clearly not doing that. And I'm sorry, if you think that every studio out there isn't going to explore, you know, like AI and Gen AI with some of this tedious animation programming type stuff, you're out of your damn mind. Everybody's going to be exploring this, and they're just not going to tell you because of all the backlash. So, all right, next, what does machine learning director do? Combat AI background dialogue. Gabriel says it's actually pretty straightforward. As ML director, I'm in charge of leading our ML team. We have an ML team whose purpose is twofold. One is to support development by helping solve concrete production problems through automation, and the second is to prepare ourselves for a future in which ML will help drive reactivity to player agency. And the final AI question. I have a couple more questions from reading this. You mentioned that you'll use Gen AI models trained on data you own for game assets. Is this the case using a personal model for everything else? If not, how so? What's an example of in-game asset that could be generated by AI? Haven't understood a distinction between creative asset and just regular asset here. I think that's a fair question because I was a little bit confused on that too. Can you give examples of the uses for Gen AI across departments to refine ideas? And Gabriel says there is currently one example of ML generated assets that end up in the game, and that is within our cinematics and animation pipeline. In this pipeline, we try to capture the actors' performances as best we can. So we use ML models to clean, retarget, and even add motion when it's not motion captured. These models are trained exclusively with Larian data. So that is it for the questions regarding AI and generative AI usage. Now there's actually like 30 to 40 more questions, which is insane. And this video is already getting insanely long. So I'm disregarding, well, I've looked at all of them. I'm throwing a bunch of them out for this particular video. All these don't really fall into the important categories that I already laid out. Some of these are more so like, you know, asking devs personal questions about games they're playing and stuff like that. But there's a few notable miscellaneous type ones here that I wanted to quickly mention before ending during the video. Just going to do a brief quick summary. So Larian is of course using their own engine, which is the Divinity engine, and they're on their 5th iteration now for Divinity. They've been developing and improving this for a very long time, and this of course is going to allow them to make bigger, better games, more of everything. But they did specifically mention substantially improved visual quality. So I mean, BG3 already looked good, but I guess Divinity is going to look even better, which is kind of crazy. They also mentioned that they're nowhere near being done casting for roles for the game, but they have already started working with actors. So they're in the phase of already recording lines and motion capture and stuff, but they're still heavily recruiting and, you know, still planning out all that stuff. Bobby Borislav, aka Bobby, is of course going to be the composer for this Divinity game, and Borislav did Original Sin 2 as well as Baldur's Gate 3. Larian mentioned that they're leaning towards bringing back Panel from Hells, but they want to do it in a more tangible, physical way. So I'm not sure exactly what that means, because I don't know what tangible really means. That's interesting to think on. But regardless, I don't want them to lean. I just want them to bring it back. I think they were great. They have a much larger audience now, so it's still going to feel like a new experience for many of the viewers. The panels were just really good overall. I hope that they don't think that they weren't good, because they were great, and I want to see them do it again. They don't even have to improve upon what they did. They were already good as it is, I would say. But hey, if they want to work towards making them a little bit more interesting, go for it. The studio ended Baldur's Gate 3 with 411. I'm assuming devs, I mean employees, devs are employees, but employees aren't necessarily developers, so to say. Whatever. 411's the number, and they now have around 500 for this Divinity phase, although they did mention they're working on another project in the past, so I'm not sure how many people are working on what. They also mentioned that the game has a strong identity and that it has reached this stage faster than they did with Baldur's Gate 3. So that is good to hear. The faster that you get that strong identity for a game, I think the better that the game ultimately becomes, because you're just blossoming on the core idea that everybody already agrees on. And lastly, I just want to mention that somebody at Larian did say that Divinity is meant to be mature in narrative, emotional complexity, both of those. So not just, you know, sex and violence being the mature themes here, narrative and emotional complexity as well, which is great to hear, especially these days when you see like some franchises being Disneyfied a little bit, which isn't really great for a lot of us, but hey. So thank you all so much for watching. Maybe when I do this in the future, I might not read out the entire questions, but especially for like the AI ones, I wanted you guys to hear the full question and the responses, but I didn't mean for the video to be this long, nor did I expect to be doing this all freaking day. But here we are. Glad to bring you guys this news. Very excited for Divinity, and of course I'll be covering every single thing that we possibly have on this game, any news, all that good stuff. And yeah, exciting times. Catch y'all in the next one. Peace.